Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, August 13, 2025. President Donald Trump speaks with European leaders and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky about his upcoming meeting in Alaska with Russian President Vladimir Putin, warning of severe consequences if Putin does not agree to end the war in Ukraine, and saying that if the first meeting goes well, a second meeting with both Putin and Zelensky could happen soon. He also told the European leaders and Zelensky that he will not negotiate land swaps. Coming up, we'll hear from President Trump, President Zelensky, and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. President Trump says he will ask Congress to extend beyond 30 days the federal takeover of the Washington, D.C. police force and suggests that he could extend it on his own by declaring a national emergency. And the president goes to the Kennedy Center to announce this year's Kennedy Center Honorees that he says he had a large hand in choosing. They are singers George Strait and Gloria Gaynor, rock band Kiss, and actors Sylvester Stallone and Michael Crawford. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent calls on the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates 0.5 percentage point in September. The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries speaks about the Democratic Party agenda at a meeting of Illinois Democratic Party officials in Springfield. And survivors of the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein will speak at a news conference in Washington when Congress returns in September, invited by a Republican and Democratic House member who are pushing for the president to release all the files on the federal investigation of Jeffrey Epstein. Washington Post writes European leaders on Wednesday implored President Donald Trump to keep one key point in mind when he meets with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. The United States must not negotiate away Ukrainian territory, especially for nothing in return. As Trump floats land swaps, Kyiv's European backers have rejected a Russian proposal to trade Ukrainian land for an undefined truce. European leaders pressed their priorities in a call with Trump organized by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz on Wednesday. They spoke first with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who traveled to Berlin, and then Trump joined. The call was intended to shape Trump's thinking before the Alaska summit on Friday, with the anxious Europeans well aware that Trump in the past has seemed to fall under Putin's spell. That was the article from the Washington Post. President Trump was asked today about how that call went.
How were your calls this morning with European leaders, and was it your call not to invite President Zelensky to your meeting with Putin?
No, just the opposite. No. We had a very good call. He was on the call. President Zelensky was on the call. I would rate it a 10, very, very friendly. I know the leaders because I was at NATO, as you know. I took it from 2% to 5%, 2% that wasn't paid, 5% that is paid, which is trillions of dollars in defense capability. No, it was always going to be, I was going to meet with President Putin, and then after that, I'm going to call the leaders and President Zelensky. I'm going to call President Zelensky, and then I'll call, probably in that order, the leaders. There's a very good chance that we're going to have a second meeting, which will be more productive than the first, because the first is I'm going to find out where we are and what we're doing. Again, this is Biden's war. This isn't my war. He got us into this thing, and it should have never happened. This war would have never happened if I were president. But it is what it is, and I'm here to fix it, and I'm here to stop 6,000, 7,000 people last week. 7,213 people last week were killed, mostly soldiers. But missiles being lobbed into towns don't exactly help either, but mostly soldiers. And Ukrainian and Russian, they're not American soldiers, but if we can save a lot of lives, it would be a great thing. I've stopped 5 wars in the last 6 months. And on top of that, we wiped out the nuclear capability of Iran, obliterated it. It's turned out to be a correct word, by the way, because some of the press said, well, maybe it wasn't obliteration. It was obliteration. And we're going to meet with, I would say, the second meeting. If the first one goes okay, we'll have a quick second one. I would like to do it almost immediately. And we'll have a quick second meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky and myself, if they'd like to have me there. And that would be a meeting where maybe it could be absolutely work. But the first meeting will not work that out. Certain great things can be gained in the first. It's going to be a very important meeting. But it's setting the table for the second meeting. I think the second meeting, if the second meeting takes place. Now, there may be no second meeting, because if I feel that it's not appropriate to have it because I didn't get the answers that we have to have, then we're not going to have a second meeting.
President Donald Trump answering reporters' questions during his visit to the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts today. He was also asked what happens if Russian President Vladimir Putin does not agree to stop the war in Ukraine.
Will Russia face any consequences if Vladimir Putin does not agree to stop the war after your meeting on Friday?
Yes, they will. Yeah.
What will the consequences
There will be
be?
consequences.
Sanctions, tariffs?
There will be, I don't have to say, there will be very severe consequences, yes. Yeah, please.
And President Trump today asked about reports that Russia is at least in part responsible for a recent hack of the computer system that manages U.S. federal court documents.
Yes, please.
Hi, sir. There's new reporting that the Russians have hacked into some computer systems that manage U.S. federal court documents. I wonder if you've seen this reporting and if you plan to bring it up with Putin when you see him later in the week.
I guess I could. Are you surprised? You know, are you surprised? They hack in. That's what they do. They're good at it. We're good at it. We're actually better at it. But no, I have heard about it. I have heard about it.
President Trump at the Kennedy Center. Newsweek writes the Administrative Office of the United States Court said last week in a news release that it has been experiencing escalated cyber attacks of a sophisticated and persistent nature on its case management system. The majority of documents on the system are available to the public, but some documents are sealed due to confidential or proprietary information. The U.S. Court's office said courts are implementing more rigorous procedures to restrict access to these sensitive documents. That was from Newsweek. More on the president's meeting with Russian President Putin and discussion about the war in Ukraine. Politico Europe writes that Donald Trump agreed with European leaders that Ukraine must be part of any discussions about territorial concessions to end the war with Russia. Emmanuel Macron said the French president was speaking after an hour-long meeting between Trump, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and European leaders ahead of the U.S. president's meeting with Russian leader Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday. Macron said that territorial questions that fall under Ukraine's authority cannot be negotiated and will only be negotiated by the president of Ukraine, adding that Trump had expressed the same. That was from Politico Europe. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky held a joint news conference today after the call with President Trump. It was in Berlin. Here is part of the Chancellor's opening statement.
We made various things clear for the negotiations. We made it clear that Ukraine has to be at the table if there are any follow-up meetings. We want to have negotiations in the right order. A ceasefire has to be the beginning of it. Important elements should then be agreed in the framework agreement. And thirdly, Ukraine is willing to discuss territorial questions, but then the contact line needs to be the starting point, and legal recognition of Russian-occupied territory is not part of discussion. Borders might not be changed through violence. Fourthly, we need robust safety assurances for Ukraine. The Ukrainian forces have to be able and to defend the sovereignty of their country, and they will be able to support on European support in the future. 5, negotiations need to be part of a transatlantic strategy. Then they are most likely to be successful. The strategy is based on supporting Ukraine and putting pressure on Russia. So if in Alaska there's no movement on the Russian side, then the US and the Europeans need to increase the pressure. President Trump knows his position. He shares them largely. So I can say we've had a very good and constructive talk. We wished President Trump all the best. We agreed that straight after the meeting with President Putin, he will inform the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and then also the European heads of state and government that are part of the initiative. There is hope that something is moving. There's hope that there's peace in Ukraine. From a joint European perspective, we're working with this, but I, from a German perspective, do everything I can to take all opportunities to get also in diplomatic fashion this war, this terrible war, to end.
The German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, through an interpreter, at a news conference in Berlin with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who said, as well through an interpreter, that Russian President Vladimir Putin is bluffing about wanting peace and about not being concerned about Western sanctions.
There should be joint pressure on Russia, there should be sanctions, and there should be a message that if Russia doesn't agrees to a ceasefire in Alaska, this principle should work. We also discussed the situation at the front line on the battlefield. I told the U.S. President and all our European colleagues that Putin is bluffing. He is trying to push forward along the whole front. And Putin is also bluffing, saying that he doesn't care about the sanctions and that they're not working. In reality, the sanctions are very effective and they're hurting the Russian military economy. It's right, Russia does have much more artillery and weapons, but Russia has 3 times as many losses. This is a fact. I told my colleagues and the United States President and my European friends that Putin doesn't want peace. He wants to occupy our country, and we all understand this, that Putin will not be able to cheat anybody, and we need American and European sanctions. And together our union, our partnership can really stop Putin's war. We discussed the meeting on Alaska, and we hope that the central theme will be a ceasefire. The United States President said this several times. He proposed to me that after the meeting in Alaska we'll have a contact and that we will discuss all the results if they are achieved, and we will define our future steps. We will have a meeting of the coalition for peace and security, and we're working on that.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at a news conference in Berlin with the German Chancellor. One of the questions to President Zelensky from the reporters was about President Trump saying this week that land swaps would likely be part of any peace deal between Ukraine and Russia.
The question to President Zelensky related to the exchange of territory. Under what conditions would you be able to talk about an exchange of territories with Putin? And, what moment is this coming Friday? Is it an historic moment? Is it one of many meetings? Thank you.
It seems to me that the success of any talks depends, first of all, on the results and the mood. And our mood now is that we are united, and it was very positive. All the partners expressed, demonstrated one voice, one desire, and the same principles and the same vision. And this is an important step forward. As for the historical nature of this moment, I wouldn't want to use such important words now. Let's wait for the result. In any case, the key questions which you asked at the beginning of your question, you talked about principles, about our territorial integrity. At the end of the day, everything is decided at the level of the leaders. It's important to solve this issue without Ukraine, and everybody supports this position.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at a news conference in Berlin, Germany, with the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, after they and other European leaders spoke to President Donald Trump about the president's upcoming visit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. And Associated Press writing in an ironic twist, President Trump is set to discuss the war in Ukraine with Russian leader Vladimir Putin at a military base in Alaska that was crucial to countering the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War and still plays a role today. The meeting is scheduled to take place Friday at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage, according to a White House official who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss internal planning. That was from Associated Press. This is Washington Today. Story from CBS News. United Launch Alliance fired off its first operational Vulcan rocket Tuesday, boosting 2 military satellites into space in the first U.S. Space Force sanctioned flight of a new launcher that eventually will replace the company's Atlas V and already retired Deltas, again from CBS News. Today in Washington, D.C., at the Atlantic Council, there was discussion about the Space Force's Space Warfighting Framework released in April, which Space Force says is the service's vision for achieving and maintaining space superiority while ensuring the long-term safety and sustainability of the space domain. One of the panelists, Victoria Sampson, with the Secure World Foundation.
I understand the ship has sailed. This is going to happen, but I will die on this hill. I think it's a mistake to call space a warfighting domain. I truly do. I think it makes sense to call it an operational domain. That's what NATO does. That allows the U.S. military to function in it. But calling it a warfighting domain, as Pete said, there's complications. Internationally, the United States is viewed as being a bad actor in space. The United States is viewed by our rivals as being the one that's weaponizing space, as the one who is making space an unsafe, unpredictable domain. Whereas we know China and Russia are doing the same things we are. However, they are smart enough to call space a military domain. And why does that even matter? So what? They don't like us, so what? Internationally, the United States is having discussions in multilateral fora about norms of behavior and what we think is responsible space actors do. The United States needs other countries to sign on to the way we view things, because this affects us. This affects us the most. We have the most to lose for an unpredictable, unstable space environment. And if we can't get other countries to sign on to the way we think about these things, we are going to lose. And the United States loses the moral high ground internationally, where Russia and China can point to us saying space is a warfighting domain, therefore, other countries don't have to listen to what we say. And I think that's going to be a real challenge for us internationally, even more so as this doctrine is being written down and publicized and made in unclassified form.
Victoria Sampson, Secure World Foundation Space Security and Stability Chief Director, at today's panel discussion at the Atlantic Council in Washington. Another panelist was Jennifer Cannon with the Aerospace Corporation Government Relations Director.
I don't think it matters, Clementine, if we call it a warfighting domain or an operational domain in the United States. But what I think does matter is our ability to work with our international allies and partners on this subject. And so if we could reach some common consensus on perhaps more details underneath that domain, it doesn't matter what you call it, right? How do we work together on space control? How do we grow the capabilities both endemically and work with our allies and partners to get their capabilities that might be better than ours, right? And so that's what NATO can be used for, an operational or warfighting domain. I mean, we have right now the Five Eyes, right? So the United States, Canada, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand. All of those countries are down representing their space community at the Street War Games right now in Alabama. And I think that's a big step to ensure that everybody is able to work together and bring their best capabilities to the fight, but also work on the classification problem, the minimizing classification on what we don't need to highly classified. I will bring up the international partnership strategy that Air Marshal Godfrey has been highlighting the last few months, and he's been working with the Chief of Space Operations to ensure that we can have a strategy that brings in those allies and partners. And one of the items that is in that strategy is how do we minimize classification so that we can all work together.
Jennifer Cannon with the Aerospace Corporation at today's Atlantic Council event on the Space Force's Space Warfighting Framework. This is Washington Today. Story from Forbes. President Trump said at a press conference Wednesday he wants to extend his administration's control of Washington's Metropolitan Police Department long-term, saying his administration is going to be asking for extensions on that because the initial 30-day period is too short. The president assumed control of MPD under a section of the Home Rule Act that governs how Washington, D.C. operates, which states the city's mayor can provide presidents the police force's services when special conditions of an emergency nature exist that necessitate using the MPD for federal purposes. Trump claimed Wednesday he can extend his control of the MPD without Congress if it's a national emergency, but that directly conflicts with the law, which says the federal government can only use the MPD for 30 days without congressional approval. That's the article from Forbes. Here's the question and answer at today's news conference with President Trump.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your federalization of the police has a 30-day limit unless Congress acts to extend it. Are you talking to Congress about extending it, or do you believe 30 days is sufficient?
Well, if it's a national emergency, we can do it without Congress, but we expect to be to Congress before Congress very quickly. And again, we think the Democrats will not do anything to stop crime, but we think the Republicans will do it almost unanimously. So we're going to need a crime bill that we're going to be putting in. And it's going to pertain initially to D.C. We're going to use it as a very positive example. And we're going to be asking for extensions on that, long-term extensions, because you can't have 30 days. 30 days that's by the time you do it. We're going to have this in good shape. And don't forget, in the border, everyone said it would take years and you'd have to go back to Congress. I never went to Congress for anything. I just said, close the border. And they closed the border. And that was the end of it. I didn't go back to Congress. We're going to do this very quickly, but we're going to want extensions. I don't want to call national emergency. If I have to, I will. But I think the Republicans in Congress will approve this pretty much unanimously.
Mr. President.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would you encourage members of the press to do ride-alongs with the D.C. police to understand how serious this crime issue is?
Sure, it's okay to me if they want to do it. We're going to work with the D.C. police. A lot of very good people in there. Not all, but a lot of very good, very, very professional. And, we have a big force. I think they said 3,500. They're always asking the mayor, who's a very nice woman, but got to do the job. We've worked with the mayor for 6 months, and she's been here for many years. And the numbers are worse than they ever are. Don't let anyone tell you they're not. And the whole statistical charts that they made, the whole thing is a rigged deal. They got rid of the guy because he didn't want to do the numbers the way they wanted to, and they put their own numbers out. They said it's the best in 20 years. No, it's the worst in 20 years. But we're going to be very open about what we're doing. So if the media wants to ride with police, if they want to do it, if they feel it's safe, that would be okay.
President Donald Trump at his news conference today during his trip to the Kennedy Center in Washington. Washington Post reporting the Trump administration is evaluating plans that would establish a domestic civil disturbance quick reaction force composed of hundreds of National Guard troops tasked with rapidly deploying into American cities facing protests or other unrest, according to internal Pentagon documents reviewed by the Washington Post. The plan calls for 600 troops to be on standby at all times so they can deploy in as little as 1 hour, the documents say. That was from the Post. U.S. Border Czar Tom Homan told reporters in the White House driveway today that Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE agents, are involved in the federal law enforcement deployment to D.C. that began last week.
Can we ask about the crime crackdown so far, how you've seen it go in the first 48 hours, if you will, and also where are we looking at in terms of the next steps?
Look, I know they've taken some bad people off the street, but in addition to that, I think it sends a strong message of consequences. I mean, deterrence. I mean, a lot of the criminals are staying off the street because they know there's an increased presence of law enforcement. They're going to take zero tolerance on criminal activity in D.C., as the president said. So I think, it works both ways. Number one, taking bad guys off the street, actually arresting some folks. Second of all, the deterrence message is keeping people off the street from doing violent things, so they know there's an uptick in law enforcement.
Do you fear, though, that if the time frame is set that after 30 days, hey, our authority's over, that then these criminals that took themselves off the streets might come right back?
The president's authority is never over. The president's going to do what he has to do to make this country safe again in every city in this nation.
U.S. Border Czar Tom Homan speaking to reporters in the White House driveway today. Another Washington Post article, the on-the-ground impact of Trump's federal actions came into view Tuesday night, with late-night diners in Georgetown gawking at a group of FBI and ATF agents and National Guard Humvees staged near the Washington Monument. According to the White House, the effort resulted in 43 arrests overnight, and officials said a significantly higher National Guard presence would be felt Wednesday evening, and the operation would soon be transitioning to a 24/7 operation. But as the federal presence came into clearer focus, Mayor Muriel Bowser, a Democrat, began deploying dual messaging, hardening her tone against Trump's executive action in a community forum Tuesday night, while on live television Wednesday morning still projecting optimism in cooperating with federal partners. That was from the Washington Post. Here is Mayor Bowser in that Tuesday night online forum.
How can the faith community help support and protect the community right now?
Well, I think the faith community knows best what they can do in the community that they're in. I don't know that I have everybody does this thing, but if you're in a community where young people need a safe place, do that. If you're in a community where moms need support, do that. If you're in a community where the violence interrupters can have a rest place, then do that. If you have a wide network where you can talk about the democracy issues facing the district, the intrusion on our autonomy, the impact on other cities, then do that. But what you shouldn't do is wait for me to tell you what to do. This is a time where community needs to jump in, and we all need to do what we can in our space, in our lane, to protect our city and to protect our autonomy, to protect our home rule, and get to the other side of this guy and make sure we elect a Democratic House so that we have a backstop to this authoritarian push.
Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, a Democrat, at a virtual community town hall meeting Tuesday night. Washington Today continues in a moment.
The weekly podcast is a unique offering from C-SPAN. We record it right here in the C-SPAN radio studios in beautiful downtown Capitol Hill. In a town where extremes get so much attention, this isn't more extreme opinion, it's extreme history, connecting the old with the new. Hear what's happening right now against the backdrop of the history you know. So listen, follow, and enjoy the C-SPAN radio podcast, The Weekly. And have friends and family who love political history and even love C-SPAN's coverage of politics? Tell them about it too. Find C-SPAN's The Weekly wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. President Donald Trump visited the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington today to announce this year's Kennedy Center Honors nominees. He began by saying that he would host the awards ceremony later this year and that he always wanted to get an honor himself.
Delighted to be here as we officially announce the incredibly talented artists who will be celebrated later this year at the 2025 Kennedy Center Honors. It's going to be a big evening. I've been asked to host. I said, I'm the President of the United States. Are you fools asking me to do that? Sir, you'll get much higher ratings. I said, I don't care. I'm President of the United States. I won't do it. They said, please. And then Susie Wells said to me, sir, I'd like you to host. I said, okay, Susie, I'll do it. That's the power she's got. But I just, so I have agreed to host. Do you believe what I have to do? And I didn't want to do it, okay? They're going to say, he insisted. I did not insist. But I think it will be quite successful, actually. It's been a long time. I used to host the Apprentice finales, and we did rather well with that. So I think we're going to do very well because we have some great honorees, some really great ones. Since 1978, the Kennedy Center Honors have been among the most prestigious awards in the performing arts. I wanted one. I was never able to get one. This year, it's true, actually. I would have taken it if they would have called me. I waited and waited and waited, and I said, the hell with it. I'll become chairman, and I'll give myself an honor. Maybe I'm going to honor, next year we'll honor Trump, okay? This year, the board has selected a truly exceptional class of honorees. I mean, really exceptional.
President Donald Trump went on to announce this year's Kennedy Center Honors nominees. Country music star George Strait, actor and comedian Michael Crawford, actor Sylvester Stallone, disco singer Gloria Gaynor, and rock band Kiss. Here's the president on the last two.
Celebrating one of the most revered singers of the American disco era, Gloria Gaynor. Best known for her chart-topping 1978 hit, I Will Survive, Gloria won the 1980 Grammy for Best Disco Recording, and her song was inducted into the National Recording Registry in 2016. 4 decades later, Gloria won a second Grammy in 2020 for her gospel album Testimony, which is incredible. Truly a historic achievement, not only in terms of the years that have gone by to be great that long, but to have the two top of anything in that span of time, and with that kind of period between, is pretty amazing. But I will say that I Will Survive is an unbelievable song. I've heard it, like everyone else here, thousands of times. And it's one of those few that get better every time you hear it. And nobody can sing it like her. And that's an honor. So, Gloria Gaynor, thank you. Thank you very much. And finally, we'll be honoring one of the greatest rock bands of all time, Kiss. So Kiss was formed in 1973 in New York City by founding band members, and incredible people, by the way, Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, Ace Frehley, and Peter Criss. Kiss became a global phenomenon, sold more than 100 million records worldwide, and produced 30 gold albums and lots of other things they produced. They made a fortune. And they're great people, and they deserve it, and they work hard, and they're still working hard, and it's an honor to present Kiss. Thank you very much. Got it? Yeah. Thank you. And they're going to do something very special. Kiss is going to be here on a little bit before the show. I think they're going to do something very special. We're going to have a good time.
President Donald Trump at the Kennedy Center today in Washington, D.C., announcing the honorees. You heard him mention the last two, Gloria Gaynor and the rock band Kiss, and again the other three, singer George Strait and actors Michael Crawford and Sylvester Stallone. The president also talked about the changes he has made and plans to make. He said of programming, we ended the woke political programming, and we're restoring the Kennedy Center as a premier venue for performing arts anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. U.S. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, posted a video today with Jack Schlossberg, the grandson of the late President John F. Kennedy, announcing that he is appointing him to a commission to celebrate the nation's 250th birthday.
I'm so proud to be here with the great Jack Schlossberg. And we couldn't think of a better place than the Brooklyn Heights Promenade, the beautiful promenade with the Statue of Liberty, the New York skyline, the amazing Brooklyn Bridge, to announce that I am so proud to appoint Jack to the America 250 Commission, which will be in charge of how we celebrate our great 250th birthday. Why am I putting Jack there? We know that Donald Trump will try to aggrandize the whole thing and make it part of him and his ego. There's no better person to push back on that than you, Jack. And I know you will be there and make sure that when we celebrate our 250th birthday, we remember that America's a nation of justice, equal justice, of unity, e pluribus unum, of treating everybody with dignity, which, of course, Trump will want to take that 250 cake and just stuff it in his face and the face of his billionaire friends. You'll be there to stop him.
Thank you for this honor. Thank you, Senator, for this honor, for your leadership, for the honor of this appointment. We are the heirs of our first revolution 250 years ago. And at our best moments, our country has lived up to our founding documents, but we have not always come through. And right now, our civil rights are under attack, equal justice is under attack, scientific progress is under attack, and I want to make sure that we celebrate our country for all of its colors, and there's no more important task than celebrating our history for the sake of our future. So thank you very much.
And now our audience can see why I appointed him, fighting for the things we believe in and that America has always believed in, and not the kind of crap that Donald Trump is throwing at every American every day, ruining our values, ruining our laws, stampeding on the Constitution. Your job, Fight back, and I know you will.
I will. I'll make you proud. And to quote our founding father, I am young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not going to throw away this shot.
Video posted by Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, standing beside Jack Schlossberg, grandson of the late President John F. Kennedy. Story from Bloomberg. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made his most explicit call yet for the Federal Reserve to execute a cycle of interest rate cuts, suggesting the central bank's benchmark ought to be at least 1.4 percentage points lower than it is now. Fed policymakers last month kept their benchmark at a target rate of 4.25% to 4.5%, where it's been all year. Bessent said officials might have cut rates if they'd been aware of the revised data on the labor market that came out a couple of days after the latest meeting. The Bureau of Labor Statistics on August 1st slashed the numbers for payroll gains in May and June by 258,000. That was from Bloomberg. Here is Treasury Secretary Bessent on Bloomberg TV.
What if the BLS data had been the higher quality and we'd had those numbers, Jonathan? So if we'd seen those numbers in May, in June, I suspect we could have had rate cuts in June and July. So that tells me that there's a very good chance of a 50 basis point rate cut. And I think President Trump is very good at giving these nicknames. And I think the reason that the Jay Powell gets the nickname too late is because he wants to go into a series of rate hikes. He's not willing. He's not Alan Greenspan, who was very forward thinking. They try to be more data driven, which I think is a mistake, because I think we are going back into an economy like we had in the 90s. So, it's just very old fashioned thinking. But I do think we could go into a series of rate cuts here, starting with a 50 basis point rate cut in September.
A 50 basis rate cut in September, does that signal that the economy, though, is not doing well?
That signals that there's an adjustment and the rates are too constrictive. If you look at any model, that we should probably be 150, 175 basis points lower.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent today on Bloomberg Television. Story from CNBC. In the face of blistering criticism from President Donald Trump, Goldman Sachs economist David Merrill on Wednesday stood by a controversial forecast that tariffs will begin to hit consumer wallets. Trump lashed out at the bank in a Tuesday post on Truth Social, suggesting that CEO David Solomon get a new economist or consider resigning. Merrill, though, said in a CNBC interview that the firm is confident in its research, the president's objections notwithstanding. That was the article from CNBC. Here is part of the interview.
We stand by the results of this study. I think it's very early to be drawing definitive conclusions about how tariff costs will be shared. But in principle, tariff costs can be borne by foreign exporters, by U.S. businesses, or by U.S. consumers. Now, we've had tariffs in place on that very first round from China for about 5-6 months, so I think we have learned a little something. Our conclusion is that U.S. businesses have borne most of the tariff costs so far because it takes time to negotiate lower import prices or to pass price increases along to consumers. But if the most recent tariffs, like the April tariff, follow the same pattern that we've seen with those earliest February tariffs, then eventually, by the fall, we estimate that consumers would bear about 2/3 of the cost, foreign exporters would bear about 1/4 of the cost, and U.S. businesses would absorb less than 10%. That probably sounds small, less than 10%, but bear in mind that is a net number. If you are a company importing or using goods to sell in the U.S., you're going to get hit harder. If you are a company producing in the U.S. who is now protected from foreign competition, you can raise your prices and benefit. So those are our estimates, and I think actually they're quite consistent with what many other economists have found.
Goldman Sachs economist David Merrill today on CNBC. Wall Street, the Dow up 463, Nasdaq up 31, S&P up 20. U.S. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, talked about the economy in his keynote speech today in Springfield, Illinois, at the state's Democratic County Chairs Association brunch.
And of course, as Democrats, we recognize that America, most importantly, is too expensive, that far too many people are struggling to live paycheck to paycheck, barely can survive. Impossible for so many people to thrive. Donald Trump promised that they would lower costs, in fact, on day one. But here in America, costs haven't gone down, costs have gone up. Inflation is on the way up. Job creation is coming down. They have failed to keep their core promise of making life more affordable for the American people while they enrich their billionaire donors. As Democrats, we understand that it's time to build an affordable economy. We have to lower the high cost of living in the United States of America, and we need to do it now. We also recognize that we have to fix our broken healthcare system, make sure that everyone has access to high-quality, affordable healthcare whenever and wherever you need it. And yes, as Democrats, we're going to focus on cleaning up corruption in Washington, D.C., and make sure we deliver a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Clean up corruption in Washington, D.C., which is hurting everyday Americans.
U.S. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, today in Springfield, Illinois, part of a larger speech on the Democratic Party's agenda before the conference of the Illinois Democratic County Chairs Association. Story from the Center Square. On the day before Social Security's 90th anniversary, fiscal watchdogs are urging Congress to seriously address the program's impending funding shortfalls, particularly in light of the now $37 trillion national debt, even as lawmakers met Wednesday to discuss increasing benefits. In a virtual town hall, Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, Congressman John Larson, Democrat from Connecticut, and other lawmakers in the Democratic caucus condemned the Trump administration closing some U.S. Social Security Administration field offices, cutting 7,000 of the 57,000 U.S. Social Security Administration employees, and scaling back some phone services, all done in the name of reducing fraud, waste, and government inefficiency. Part of the reporting from the Center Square. And here is part of that virtual news conference, Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont.
Today and this week, we are celebrating the 90th anniversary of Social Security, the most popular government program in our nation's history. For nearly 9 decades, through good times and bad, Social Security has paid out every benefit owed to every single American on time and without delay. Before Social Security was signed into law, half of seniors lived in poverty. Today, while the number is still too high, it is only 10%. That is not, as Elon Musk and others have suggested, the greatest Ponzi scheme of all time, end quote. In fact, that is the most successful government program of all time. And yet, despite its popularity and despite its success, Trump and Musk and others have been working overtime to try to dismantle Social Security and, importantly, undermine the confidence that the American people have in it. Since Trump took office, his administration has fired at least 7,000 workers at the Social Security Administration, shut down Social Security field offices, and made it more difficult for seniors and the disabled to receive the benefits that they have earned over the phone. Trump and Musk have also absurdly and quite intentionally lied to the American people by suggesting that millions and millions of people who are between the ages of 140 and 360 years of age are receiving Social Security system. Oh my God, the whole system is fraudulent. That, of course, is a lie. The reality is that well over 99% of Social Security checks go to the people who have earned those benefits. No one who is 150 or 200 or 300 years of age is collecting Social Security. Yet Trump and his friends continue their efforts to try to destroy Social Security. And what our legislation is about is saying, no, you're not going to destroy Social Security. We're going to expand it.
Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, on a virtual news conference with other Democratic elected officials and advocates ahead of tomorrow's 90th anniversary of the creation of Social Security. Story from the Hill. Congressman Ro Khanna, Democrat of California, and Thomas Massie, Democrat of Kentucky, are planning to bring survivors of abuse by convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and his convicted co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell to the Capitol. Khanna and Massie announced the survivors will join them at a press conference the morning of September 3rd, the day the House returns from August recess. Massie said in a post on the social platform X, the survivors deserve justice and Americans deserve transparency. The press conference comes as Khanna and Massie are pushing legislation to compel the Trump administration to release the Epstein files, documents and materials related to the investigation of Epstein and Maxwell. That was from The Hill. A lawyer for several Epstein victims, Spencer Kuvin, was on MSNBC Tuesday night.
Spencer, your sense of how these survivors can potentially open the aperture on transparency?
Thank you for having me on. You know, it's unfathomable that we really forget about throughout this whole process, survivors. They are the ones that matter. You know, these are victims of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and these are the people that want their voices heard. So it is wonderful that they're actually bringing them to speak. In addition, they have always wanted full accountability, not only Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, but on behalf of everyone that was part of this conspiracy from the beginning. That's why they want the files released.
And I guess, Spencer, what would be satisfactory to them? Save a full disclosure of all of the files. What specifically from this do you believe would say, okay, we've moved the needle a little bit?
I think at the end of the day, we have always pushed for an executive order from Donald Trump to release everything that is in the custody of the Department of Justice. You know, when he's passing these executive orders for the National Guard in D.C., slip in an executive order that says, oh, and by the way, release all the files. They've got thousands of hours of videotape that was confiscated from Epstein's mansions in New York, in the Virgin Islands, and in Palm Beach, where I'm at. Release the videotapes. Protect the victims, obviously, because they were minors at the time. But everyone else that's on them, let the world see who was there and let them account for why they were with Jeffrey Epstein when they were there.
Spencer Kuvin, a lawyer for many Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell victims, interviewed on MSNBC Tuesday night. And those survivors, along with the two members of Congress who have been pushing for the release of the Epstein files, Republican Thomas Massie of Kentucky and Democrat Ro Khanna of California, plan to hold a news conference in the U.S. Capitol building on September 3rd when Congress returns from August recess. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.